If Turkey is to have the assistance it needs, the United States must supply it. We are the only country able to provide that help.
In the middle of the 20th century, war broke out between the Axis forces and Allied forces. The United States, Great Britain, and Soviet Union made up the Big Three, responsible for bringing the war to an end. For much of World War II, the United States and the Soviets were allies, working together to attack the Nazis from both the East and West. As the war ended, the United States and the Soviets' relationship began to deteriorate. The USSR, under the control of Joseph Stalin, had instituted a system of government known as communism. The United States, however, governed by Harry S. Truman, was under a democratic republic government system. These political systems directly opposed one another, with the democratic republic providing the people with fair representation and equality under the law, whereas the communist system of government took away the natural rights of the people, giving the government unlimited power to do what they pleased. This frightened the U.S. The spread of communism could mean the end of democracy in both Eastern and Western Europe, creating a series of cataclysmic events leading to the end of democracy in not only Europe, but also the United States. This belief, also known as the domino effect, was the grounds upon which the Truman Doctrine was established. In hopes of deterring the spread of communism, the U.S. offered aid to those states in the realm of the USSR, known as satellite states, or states that were under the control of Russia due to their geographical location. Under the Truman Doctrine, countries affected by the USSR would be granted financial aid to push back against the encroachment of the Red Army.
In the 1940s, in Greece, a civil war broke out between communists and capitalists. In late March of 1947, in the heat of the Greek Civil War between the Greek Communist Party and the Greek government, the British government announced they would no longer be providing any more military or economic support to the Greek government. This frightened Truman and the U.S. The establishment of communism in Greece could result in a toppling of democratic nations in Eastern Europe. This fear caused Truman to give a speech in which he requested $400 million and the dispatch of American military and civilian personnel and equipment.
The British government has informed us that, owing to its own difficulties, it can no longer extend financial or economic aid to Turkey. As in the case of Greece, if Turkey is to have the assistance it needs, the United States must supply it. We are the only country able to provide that help. One of the primary objectives of the foreign policy of the United States is the creation of conditions in which we and other nations will be able to work out a way of life free from coercion. This was a fundamental issue in the war with Germany and Japan. Our victory was won over countries which sought to impose their will and their way of life upon other nations.
This marked the beginning of the Cold War and the establishment and promotion of political ideas in foreign territory with proxy wars. The institution of the Truman Doctrine kickstarted a period of post-war tension based on the success of a diplomatic approach to the spread of communism between the Soviet Union and the United States. The Truman Doctrine, being instituted in the 1940s, meant that this would mark the beginning of the Cold War. The Truman Doctrine not only helped both the Greek and Turkish governments to prevent the spread of communism, but it also created room for other diplomatic policies to help stop the encroaching threat of communism upon the U.S. The Truman Doctrine also provided firm anti-communist grounds which the U.S. would stake their beliefs during the Cold War era.
The short-term effects of the Truman Doctrine were significant for both capitalist and communist. For capitalist, it marked an absolute belief that Russia was a threat to democracy in the East and that the U.S. would go to great measures to prevent the spread of communism in Europe. This also marked the end of an idea of isolationism, or the idea of staying neutral in foreign affairs. Short-term, this would jumpstart American involvement in Turkey and Greece, helping the capitalists beat communist ideas and establishing democracy. It would also eventually lead to American involvement in Vietnam in hopes of stopping the spread of communism into South Vietnam. Finally, involvement into the Middle East, specifically Afghanistan, would also result in hopes of stopping the USSR's spread of communism into the Middle East. America and affected capitalist countries used the Truman Doctrine as a tool to fight the USSR through proxy wars, because both the US and USSR recognized that any actual war that was fought would result in mutually assured destruction, or MAD. This belief came after the dropping of the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Seeing the total devastation that event caused to Japan, the USSR and US recognized that any real war would be catastrophic. The doctrine served as a vessel through which America could influence the development of foreign countries by providing money to the capitalist government in which they supported. The Truman Doctrine also led to the establishment of the Marshall Plan, in which the United States would provide aid to the countries surrounded by and influenced by the USSR, known as satellite states. For communists and the USSR, the Truman Doctrine inhibited their ability to spread communism in Eastern and Western Europe. Due to the aid given to countries afflicted by communism, the US and the Truman Doctrine, along with the Marshall Plan, were successfully able to fight back the spread of communist ideas and government systems, resulting in the end of the spread of communism.
The Truman Doctrine was used to establish a diplomatic approach to foreign issues, specifically those involving communism in the USSR. The success of the doctrine has lasting effects that are ever present today. First, it established a basis upon which the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, would be founded. The doctrine's success showed that a diplomatic approach to political issues could often be more influential than a militaristic approach. The most important effect of the Truman Doctrine was that it led to a near-complete eradication of communism in Europe. It limited the scope in which the USSR had control over Eastern Europe. The establishment of the Truman Doctrine also allowed countries in Europe affected by Russia to re-establish successful economies. The establishment of groups such as the Organization for European Economic Cooperation were instituted to determine how funds from the Marshall Plan were allocated. The doctrine was also successful at gaining support to pass as a bilateral bill uniting people on both ends of the political spectrum to unite against the Soviets. The Truman Doctrine ultimately served as a platform for the U.S. to extend economic aid to foreign countries amid a crisis, stabilizing regions through diplomacy. For communists, the Truman Doctrine eventually led to the end of the spread of their ideals. Since the doctrine provided a chokehold on Soviet ideals, the USSR had no choice but to take a diplomatic approach at the end of the Cold War. The Malta Summit, in which George H.W. Bush met with Mikhail Gorbachev, was the official end of the Cold War in 1989. Here, the US and USSR established the lifting of the Iron Curtain and discussed how Europe would be rebuilt following the Cold War. This monumental moment happened as a result of the success of the Truman Doctrine as a diplomatic approach to foreign issues.
The Truman Doctrine was a successful diplomatic approach to the spread of communism, establishing a non-militaristic based approach to communism, establishing peaceful treaties and relationships with the countries affected by the USSR, and setting up for the eventual end of communism in Europe. Its short-term effects included the end and victory of both the Greek and Turkish civil wars, an establishment of treaty organizations including NATO, and provided a focal point for America to rally around while fighting Russia in the Cold War. Its long-term effects included providing a basis for European countries to successfully re-establish their economies, the allocation of funds to countries affected by the USSR, and the end of U.S. isolationism for foreign affairs. The diplomatic approach to the spread of communism via the Truman Doctrine had positive effects on U.S. foreign aid in both the short and long term, redefining the U.S. ideals of isolationism and establishing the United States as an economic stabilizer in destabilized regions.
General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.